Last time we were together, we talked about who's running the country. Well, we should have put up the graphic to be continued because the conversation continues this week on the Public Square. Who's running the country continued. I'm Wayne Shepherd with Dave Zanotti and the team from the Public Square. Alan C. Duncan, our producer, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate. And here we are, Dave. We're back at it.
We are, Wayne, and that's because we've had some dialogue with listeners, and the conversation has continued through the staff as well about this entire moment in history where we've come to the realization that we came through a presidential campaign in 2020 that was governed by COVID, and what a different world it was, how blown up everyone's expectations were, how awkward the entire election of 2020 was. And I can tell you from being on the ground in regards to watching states and state election laws and being concerned about federal litigation, that because the states can't change federal election laws unless they do it in certain ways. Now, most of what was going on during that entire COVID conversation as far as elections was politics. And it was kind of grass tops. It was something's not right, but no one was getting to the bottom. We were getting to the bottom of what wasn't right. And the idea that there are certain ways and procedures, because we do elections. That's what iVoters.com is all about. We've been at it since 1980. And we have a great concern about the integrity of election laws and the execution of election laws, that they got to be done correctly, or else we lose faith in our system. So we were on a whole nother track with lawyers and research. And that case, by the way, did get created and then was not heard. The Supreme Court chose to duck the case. And the reason that the Supreme Court ducked the real case on the 2020 election was because it came too late. And but see, this is a story that doesn't ever get reported because it's not the way that everyone wants the story to read. You know, it's not shirts and skins. It's not red and blue crayons. It's not who got punched in the face and who responded. This is the tough stuff.
It's the very tough stuff, and it's something that people should care about regardless of which crayon color does win, red or blue. I mean, and I think that's where we found ourselves during those COVID years, is people, their opinion would change based upon who was in leadership and what letter was next to their name in whatever state they lived.
And the reason we bring back COVID is because it's going to have an impact in regards to what's happening at the end of this conversation. So this is something that today you want to make sure you stick with us for the entire program, even if you've got to go back. We understand, we appreciate it. That's why we're always available online. Plus, we want you to go to YouTube and watch the conversation that's posted there on video, which was a continuation of last week's conversation, which is also relevant because these are very big subjects. Now, I haven't even gotten Wayne out of 2020. All right. Now we update to 2024 and what happened. And that brings us to Jake Tapper and Mr. Thompson on the Tapper and Thompson book on original sin. And that's what captured us last week. And we've had a lot of listener response. So this is where the conversation is going on. And it's themed in the question that Jeffrey Goldberg asked in the television show that we were talking about that was on PBS, that Thompson and Tapper brought up in their book in italics. Who is running the country? And that has to do with the fact that Joe Biden was incapacitated, largely. And there was a lot of things that were made up and a lot of things that were covered up. And now Tapper and Thompson are basically unveiling them. So this isn't us doing the unveil. This is CNN, Axios, and The Atlantic. So let's get this straight. This isn't a mega production here. Okay? This is all about what was going on behind the scenes that now suddenly people feel safe to talk about, or profitable, whatever the case may be, because the book's a bestseller. One of the comments that came up from listeners was a question about how well we had the opportunity to read the book before we started the conversation. And I wanted to clear the air on that. We knew this was going to be a lengthy conversation. We could have perhaps mentioned it this way, but we wanted to focus exclusively on that television show from The Atlantic and the authors and what they said and what Mr. Goldberg was saying, because that in and of itself was so significant that it's like the book would come after that, because they were basically telling their war stories, and we wanted to get into that piece of it.
Yeah, the comments from the researchers, the people that actually wrote the book, and try and get into their mindset on, why they wanted to write the book and what they found out by doing it. And of course, we're happy to hear those stories, and we're happy they came to the forefront. And I mean, you do have to ask yourself the question, we appreciate it, but what did take you so long?
Yeah, well, and just for the record, a number of us are now into the book. Yes, we have the book. Yes, we are tearing through the book. Yes, I've not only completed the book, but I've also got into the index now. All right, and so we are digging in right order in a timely fashion to go deeper into this conversation. So, why are we going to stick with this for a while? Because this is the most revealed scandal that we've had in American history. Now you say, wait a minute, the Woodrow Wilson issue that you brought up last week, Jeff, is a big deal.
Woodrow Wilson, there were issues with Franklin Roosevelt, with John F. Kennedy and his health while he was president, and so forth.
Yeah, this is not new territory where the health of a president would be covered up, and in fact, the practice of the running of the presidency would be handed off behind closed doors without revelation. This has happened before. Mm-hmm. All right, and it's happened with both Republicans and with Democrats.
Yep.
So this is a human dilemma. It's just that this one we've got more information on than we've ever had before because we live in the era that we live in now. What's intriguing about that is a big part of the Tapper conversation in the book was about a conversation he had directly, and this is how he closes the book, a conversation he had directly with Joe Biden as Joe Biden was running for office and asking Biden, are you guaranteeing us that you are going to give us transparency on your health? You're going to be the oldest president to serve in office. What if this happens? And so he includes this dialogue, conversation he had with Joe Biden. And Joe Biden guaranteed him that he would be totally transparent regarding his health. And the final words of the book are, he was not. So in essence, Tapper wrote this book to say Joe Biden broke his promise to me.
Well, and in that discussion, you can take from it as well that the reason Donald Trump's age and health didn't come up during the campaign as much, or people couldn't talk about it, is because the Democrat president the 4 years prior was the same age. They tried to make a case for it at times, and people are like, wait a minute here. You were defending this guy a handful of months ago. We really can't go there. And that's why his age and health weren't at the forefront.
So what is the scandal? The scandal is not something, as we spoke about last week, and we talked again, visit us at YouTube at the Public Square. You'll find additional conversation. This is not a situation where we are going to present a legal case and present specific federal or state laws that have been violated and are events that should be prosecuted. That's not where we're going. We're talking about what happened and trying to get to the bottom of all of it. What's the teachable moment here? We don't want this to happen again. That's the teachable moment, and it could happen through anybody could pull this off. It's happened before. It's now happened again. And what do we do about that? So that's the conversation in regards to who's running the country, because it seemed that we were perilously close to not only not knowing, but there were moments that I think were pretty creepy, that we were very vulnerable. And I don't think that's something that anyone would want to see going forward. Now, there's a bigger message in all of this, and that is that what's the problem underneath the problem? The problem isn't a president that becomes incapacitated. We have a methodology for that in our country. There's no reason that Kamala Harris should not have taken over. We could have exercised the 25th Amendment. Joe Biden could have resigned, and we would have ended up in exactly the same spot, right, with Kamala Harris running for the presidency. All right? We would have ended up in the same place if Joe Biden had resigned. Kamala Harris would have become president. She would have run instead of. So we would have. So why didn't everyone stop and say, let's do the responsible thing?
Well, I think it goes back to your crayon illustration with red and blue, because the folks that were calling for the 25th Amendment during the first Trump administration now all of a sudden weren't willing to look at that same opportunity or reason to examine it. So I think hypocrisy played a bit into it.
At the heart of every matter is the matter of the heart. What's the problem here? Two things, greed and pride. Greed for power, lust for power, absolute power and control. And it's in both parties. I'm not playing favorites. And then pride. I can't admit that I've made a mistake. I can't admit that I'm on a team that has someone who quite possibly has dementia and is incapable of performing at this level.
Now, the book reveals one other point, and it wasn't just in the book, it's been all over the place, this conversation, was that Joe Biden and a group of people around him were convinced that because he was the only person who beat Donald Trump, he's the only person who could.
Did they talk about national security in the book at all? Like hiding Biden's incapacity before the world? Did that come up? Because that'd be the only reason that I could see that you could even make a case for doing that at all. For you don't necessarily want all the other nations surrounding you to know your president doesn't have it anymore.
Yes.
So national security, did they bring that up?
I think that even the bigger question behind that is why did they have such limited access? They had limited access because they sincerely did not want people to know the limited capacity. There's no question about that. What did they say? They would close his day. They had terms for that. The ceiling on his schedule got down to 2 hours a day, and so that was all about it. But the point is it was the quest to hold the White House. And in essence, that's where the conversation came up from the program the other day, is that sometimes when you are afraid of losing power, you do things you wouldn't otherwise do.
Let's continue to talk about the issue in just a moment when we continue here in the public square. And before we're done today, we're going to talk about what we need to do. So that's all ahead as you stay with us on the public square, on radio and online and on a smartphone app, thepublicsquare.com.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the public square.
Who's Running the Country continue this week on the public square with the team, and Dave Zanotti, right back to you.
Melanie, you've been we're in trouble. Melanie has a clipboard and she has 2 columns of notes already, and we're in segment 1.
Great to have you back for this conversation. We missed you last week, Melanie.
Oh, I missed you all too.
And by the way, Wayne, when she's gone, we hear listeners ask us, where is she?
We heard about it, didn't we?
People are worried that we really can't pull this off without total discord, without the den mother of the club.
Yeah.
So
they just put
they
me
never
in a box
ask
once in a
about
while.
Right,
they never ask about us. No, they don't ask about anybody
Where's
else.
Melanie?
It's Melanie.
So Melanie, please, the floor is yours.
No pressure, Melanie. Go ahead.
I think to some extent, and maybe I'm just a master of the obvious, but I think the one element we're missing, and even the title of the book being Original Sin, I think the sin was not the fact that Joe Biden ran or that Kamala Harris came in with a short run, in a sprint fashion from her announcement to the election day. I think the original sin was that the process violated the principle of the consent of the governed. There was no effort to draw in the broad-based members of the Democratic Party so that they could pick who the nominee was.
Forget the general public or even the opposition. They weren't even talking to their own folks.
Which is irrelevant to Joe Biden being incapacitated. For whatever reason he would choose not to run, their process was sinful.
All right, so let me stop right here, and because we talked about this in advance, at what point people are going to throw up their hands and say, I'm done with this, I don't want to hear anymore, or it's too hard. Let's stop right here. This is why civil government is messy, and self-government is messier still.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the hard stuff that we wish we just had entertainment quality and pizzazz and Cirque du Soleil performers here to keep everyone's attention, because this is the messy stuff of civil government, and life's hard enough. You want to be able to trust that the people that you've elected are going to do the right thing all the time or as best their ability. But they're not going to come up to a point of saying we've got an existential crisis, therefore the ends justify the means and we'll clean up the mess later. That's been a lot of what's been happening in government in our lifetimes.
That's the truth. I mean, we look at. I come in from a policy perspective. We're constantly cleaning up policy
endlessly.
With
people who come up with an idea, they pass it. It's got power. They've got a ballot issue. They pass it. It's got power, and then all of a sudden goes.
It's got unintended consequences or intended consequences.
Yeah. Now what?
Well, I think another thing the book helped to bring out that people talked about, but the administration kind of, walked away from when it was brought to their attention at the time, or they tried to ignore it, was the fact that behind the scenes, the teams didn't really get along, or the players of the Democrat team didn't get along. When you look at Team Harris and Team Biden, and the fact that she was picked to be on the ticket because of, quite literally some boxes she was able to check off. Mm-hmm. That's why she was picked to be the running mate. And it was clear that the Biden team didn't really trust the Harris team. And the book dives into that, as well as the fact, listen, I said it for years when I watched it. I remember watching it live when Kamala Harris, basically insinuated Joe Biden was a racist.
Oh, she came out and said it
during the debate. And I was like, oh my goodness.
I was the little girl on that bus. I remember that interchange. Yeah.
And watching that, I'm like, well, why wouldn't Donald Trump just, in this past, or in the 2020 election, run that as a campaign commercial saying, this is what, his running mate thinks of him. But in the book, I believe it goes into the fact that Joe Biden, kind of resented her for that she attacked him so hard.
There is no doubt at all that both camps despised one another. The Harris camp on one side, Biden camp on the other. But what bothers me is that in the very undemocratic way in which Kamala Harris was selected, the party bosses know what is best for their people. So they say, we're going to select this person. Apparently, the Democratic voters were not too terribly bothered with that because 70 million people still voted for her
that's a big
anyway.
Point. That's a big point, yeah.
I was going to say, didn't Jill Biden wear, Dr. Jill Biden, didn't she wear a red dress on election day?
Yes, she did. Yes, she did.
All right, lest we trace down that conspiracy trail. Let's go back to something else that was going on at the same time that's completely forgotten here. We're now focused on the challenges that the Biden administration had in regards to health and practice, and then the cover-up that was a part of that. And part of what Tapper is doing in his book is Tapper and Thompson, is they're trying to, I think, build cover for the media by basically saying, look, we just didn't have the access that we needed to be able to make that happen. Now, that may be a case that is true, but something we were also missing is at the same time all of this was going on, there was a phenomenal set of prosecutions going against Donald Trump in the state and federal courts, orchestrated by Democratic power brokers and people who ran for office and secured offices in the Democrat Party and then became elected officials on the intention of prosecuting Donald Trump so that he could not effectively run for office at the same time. So lest you think, gee, this was just the misfortunate happening of fate and they were trying to deal with a problem. No, you can't get past the crisis of the power curve. Existential threats make sometimes doing undemocratic things right. An existential threat to democracy sometimes makes doing anti-democratic things right. That's the premise of the methodology. The ends justifies the means.
By any means necessary.
That's a bigger problem than everything else we've talked about. Forget Trump, forget Biden, forget who the players are. Just make this up as a stage play and call them a person A and person B. This is a war for power.
Yeah, and if those are the rules, then the Constitution has no power. Because if you can always come up with a reason on why because maybe your emergency is a little bit bigger than my emergency. But if I think my emergency is more important, then the ends justify the means. I can say, well, wait a minute, we can ignore that. None of that applies.
This is making me think there's a lot of floating talk about Donald Trump running for a third term. And so will a lot of MAGA folks keep the same energy?
I'm glad you brought that up because that idea of Trump doing a third term is absurd. It's anti-constitutional, and
it ends when the question happens.
Yes.
Ooh, good answer.
I have heard people say he just kind of floats it out there as like this looming
He's
threat to
trolling.
make sure that he doesn't
yeah.
have he's not a lame duck president in a sense. I've heard people say he's kind of using
He's
that.
messing with people's minds on purpose. That's his MO.
But for people out there who are saying, I want him to do that,
yeah, that's
are
wrong.
they utilizing the same mindset that we're talking about here?
Well, there's people that said they wanted
fair question.
Barack Obama to do it as well, but it was never constitutionally possible. So I guess that's probably why we don't take it seriously.
I guess you could change the Constitution, but that's hard to do.
well, then that's another conversation because changing the Constitution is constitutional.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a methodology that's afforded.
Yep.
All right. I've been spending a lot of hours on this since we were last together, and this thought just pops in my head for the first time. Do you think that the leaders that run Congress today, that run the White House today, that run the Supreme Court, do you think that the leaders that we have in office don't believe in the Constitution anymore?
I'd say a good number of them. Look at COVID. Look at how Democrat and Republican members of our federal government and state government, because of a virus, threw the U.S. Constitution or their state constitutions out the window, under the bus, and laughed at us.
Melanie, you look very pensive there. What's your thought? Do you think that people who are currently, it's gone so long that they've lost faith the Constitution is workable or important or valuable or more important than anything else?
I think that when you start at point A and you try to aim for point B, and if the listeners could visualize where I'm standing as point A, and I want to make a straight line to point B, so that would be the constitutional principle, but I veer off 5 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I get to where I think point B is, I'm way
You're a
out
mile down the
here.
road.
I'm
Yeah.
a mile off.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's happened over time is that they stopped applying the principles of the Constitution so many times. It's hard to retrace and go back and get to that straight line again from A to B.
Someone was talking to me the other day about America, and they said, well, what's the anniversary? How old's the Declaration going to be? Is it 250 years? He said, well, it's a really young nation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Compared to so many others. I said, yeah, we're definitely an adolescent nation, and right now we show all the tendencies.
Uh-huh.
We're acting just like adolescents who say the rules count, but they don't count for me.
Mm-hmm.
Or you don't see the emergency, the existential threat in front of us. You don't see that. So that's what's justifying my rule breaking. The only guiding principle I have is I must succeed. That's it.
Well, my principle of adolescence is the toddlerhood of adulthood.
Well, and I'd say one more thing about
like that.
about the concept of adolescence. It's a time when we forget a lot of things that we were raised to believe, or that we test them and throw them out the window.
You push boundaries. You
Right,
push to
as
see
far as
what you can get away
to
with.
see what you can get away
Right.
with. Let me go back to something because I know we got to run to a close here or to a break. Melanie used the question, and earlier we talked about the title, The Original Sin. Here is what Jake Tapper and Mr. Thompson wrote in their foreword regarding the title of the book, Original Sin. The original sin of election 2024 was Biden's decision to run for re-election, followed by aggressive efforts to hide his cognitive diminishment. Let me repeat. The original sin of election 2024 was Biden's decision to run for re-election, followed by aggressive efforts to hide his cognitive diminishment. That's, in essence, the premise of the book that got us into this entire conversation, and it still has got scores of questions. Now, we're going to take a turn here in just a second, but there's still more to talk about.
Yep, there is indeed, and we'll get to it next. I mentioned our website, thepublicsquare.com, our smartphone app, The Public Square, and now YouTube. Go to youtube.com and type in The Public Square to find us.
You help us think well on these issues, a listener of The Public Square recently wrote. We appreciate the compliment, but none of these conversations would be happening without the help of listeners just like you. Every day, good old regular people of all ages take a moment to send support to the Public Square. Giving is easy, safe, and secure. Just log on to thepublicsquare.com to find out how. Thank you for helping to spread the light of liberty across the land.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
The discussion today, a continuation of last week's program, Who's Running the Country? But Dave, you're in the process of writing the June monthly update, June 2025, and we've all seen a draft of it. Can we talk about that?
Well, the reason that in going through all this reflection and thinking about all the questions that we've had as a team here in this last week, and just even the conversation we had before we turned on the mics today, I mean, we've gone from bad to worse. The more we dig into this story, the crazier it becomes, the more difficult it becomes, the more frightening it becomes. It gets to a place where what we have done is taken something that was bad, and now as a team on the Public Square, we're making it worse. Right? And the question becomes, at what point are people going to be so discouraged that they just say, I give up. I cannot make a difference. So we've got to talk about that. And the reason that they would give up is because basically it seems that fixing these kinds of problems are so deep, they run so deep across our whole culture that it's impossible. It's just impossible. And so I was thinking about, when I was writing the monthly update about it, somebody had told us 45 years ago when we were going to start a public policy organization, how hard it would be. I think I would have been definitely heading to that other job opportunity. All right, I would have been back at the company with my safe name tag and my stock ownership, and I would have stayed right there. All right, and said, I'm good. I got a family company. I'm not rich, not making a lot of money, but I got a job. I know how to do this. I know how to pour lead and magnesium. All right, I can do that. Cool. We can stamp lead anodes. That's what we were doing. We were in the metals business. I can go work in a shop just like my dad did. All right, so I got a job. I probably would have turned away. I would have looked back and gone back. I think that the chance of success was about zero, pretty much impossible. And I look back at so many people who started organizations and made commitments to be on this mission field back in the early 80s, and almost all of them are gone. Why is that? Because this is really hard.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about de Tocqueville, and when he came to America, he was impressed with so many different things, particularly the impact of the Christian faith on the conduct of our country. And de Tocqueville figured this out. I mean, he's a significant commentator on American culture because at the same time, the French Revolution is trying to bring liberty to France without the constraints and the revelation of Christianity solely based on human reason. De Tocqueville's not buying that. Mm-hmm. He says, wait a second, there's a connection between self-government and moral restraint. And if I don't have a transcendent reason to do the right thing that goes beyond my government, my circumstances, and my conveniences, I'm probably going to do the wrong thing. And so we can constantly go back and look at the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and say what the difference was. De Tocqueville said it was the role of biblical faith in the culture and the American habit of voluntary associations.
You can't write a law that forces everybody to do that.
Laws don't make people do the right thing.
You cannot have a tyrannical government forcing you to live as a free human being. The Soviet Union can't do it. The North Korea, the Chinese, they can't do it. It's impossible. You have to voluntarily come to this conclusion.
Well, and I think that's where we're losing some of our history, especially in state legislatures across the country, because I think whether it's governed by the folks with D's next to their name or R's next to their name, I think they get in that tyrannical mindset and want to tell people how they're supposed to live their life. I see laws that are being proposed and even passed, and I say, that's not the role of state government. Do we believe in a free society? Have we studied our history?
The danger of endless public opinion polls is every time that we go into that process, we fall into the trap of believing that government should follow the polls, not the law. Every time they use the word democracy, anyone uses the word democracy instead of republic, we reinforce the idea that we are a government of men and not of laws. This is what is happening, and our culture is being conditioned to say we can do whatever we have to do because the people want it that way. That's not the definition of the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed is a situation whereby we came together and said, here's the rules that we're all going to play by. All right? That's how it works. That's how it works. And it was a covenantal agreement in a representative form of a civil government called a republic, a constitutional republic. So we've got a methodology here that we're casting to the wind for lots and lots of reasons, most of which is for power. My point is this. As hard as this work is, as hard as it is you ever been a part of an organization that just kind of faded away? It's like, yeah, most of them.
Yeah.
Right. Now, there's some amazing organizations, nonprofit organizations in America that have been around for 100, 200 years. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. All right. But most of them don't make it. Now, a lot of them work themselves out of a job because they fixed the problem they were trying to solve. Thanks be to God. That's wonderful. In fact, people say to us, well, how long do you expect Roundtable to be around? We said, just till we finish the problem. Because then we'd like go back and do something else. Mm-hmm. We just had no idea that the problem is fundamentally impossible. You know why? Because human beings cannot change one another. Doesn't matter how articulate you are, how brilliant you are. It doesn't matter how powerful your arguments are. It doesn't matter if you're quoting the very living words of God himself. Human beings cannot change other human beings.
You can only change yourself.
Really interesting to me that de Tocqueville noticed this in his day, which we would look back on and see it as a day of simplicity, right? And think of all the complexity of American life today, and it's still true.
And yet, Tocqueville and others, because they started at the right place in the argument, as G.K. Chesterton would say, because their circle was not too small and they started in the right place of the argument. They started from the philosophical point of reality and truth. They were able to handle the most sophisticated things and get them in their right order, in their right sequence, so that at the end, people saw the value of doing the right thing the right way. But you know what? That's still, even as compelling an argument that is, if a person doesn't have the desire to do the right thing the right way, they're not going to. And guess what? We can sit here and do a million zillion radio shows. We can. So what's the answer? It's impossible. So I'm sitting there thinking about this. This is impossible. No wonder this is so hard.
Well, yeah, it seems impossible, but we also think back, that's looking at the big picture. But when you think back and look at the individual lives that have been impacted, or the individual, we'll call them wins, the pieces of legislation that have been impacted, the communities that have been changed, the lives that have been changed.
He's coming up in the outside lane is Jimmy Stewart, all right, telling us that Pottersville is avoidable if you just do the right thing.
I want to look at it from the other end of the spectrum, and maybe this may be too early in the program to do that, but if we went back to the founders and said, okay, 250 years from signing the Declaration, there will be a country of 335 million people. You had a pretty bad war between each other, and the country survived that.
Yeah.
And is better for it. Now, it's still a regrettable action. Mm-hmm. But, if they would have looked at it like that and they could have gotten the DeLorean and come forward 250 years and saw it, I do wonder if they would be shocked at some of the stupid mistakes we've made and we've survived to this point.
I'm not sure, because the more I read them, the more I realize how much they understood the fallen nature of humanity.
Oh, yes, they did.
That we would always forget, we would always come back to doing the wrong thing, and that, in essence, civil government under the rule of law is impossible, because it's impossible for us to find the selfless kind of love it requires unless we're spiritually changed.
If men were angels, we'd need no laws.
But men are not angels.
Yeah, we're fallen.
James Madison. So the point is, there's a passage in the Bible, several passages, particularly in the New Testament, there are 4, in which an impossible situation is explained, and the answer is always the same. With man, this is impossible, but not with God. with God, all things are possible.
By the way, Dave, I'm so glad you moved from hot metals to hot issues so you could be with us on the public square. Thank you very much.
Me too. The summers weren't much fun in those plants.
All right, we have more to come on the public square. You stay with us. Back with you on the public square now with a team here that consists of Dave Zanotti, Jeff Sanders, Alan C. Duncan, Melanie Elsing, Rob Walgate, and I'm Wayne Shepard, trying to keep up with this group here today. You guys are way ahead of me thinking-wise, and I really appreciate that. And let me say as a listener, and I really appreciate what you all do.
Wow, Wayne, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's go to the first place that we hear this verse, and it comes from the angel Gabriel, who's talking to a teenage girl in occupied Judea, telling her that a Messiah is about to be born very soon, and she is going to be the mother of that Messiah miraculously. Now, she's got some questions, and she gets some answers, and the bottom line is, yeah, this is going to be a miracle, and it's for a reason. The Messiah, the deliverer, the one who sets captives free is about to come, and you're the agency through which God is going to bring the living word of God here to this planet. And her famous response, be it done unto me according to thy word, and all that follows there, and the beautiful words of the Magnificat and all that are there. But there's an interesting passage. Gabriel says this, for nothing is impossible with God. Now, if you look at the translation of that in the original languages, A.T. Robertson leans in on this one as well. You could come up with another way of saying that. For no word of God comes without power.
Yeah. Nothing shall be powerless.
Yes.
Every word from God, literally word for word in the Greek.
Yes. And so what God says, he will do. And that is as significant in regards to the birth of the Messiah as it is to any of our personal relationships with God, as it is to the way that God chooses to judge the world and the nations. There is no word that comes from God that comes without power. Nothing is impossible with God. Now, let's take the second look. Jesus is in a conversation that some of us take quite personally. I understand, Rob, that you've got one of those passages permanently placed on your body for a reason.
Oh, yes, there's permanent ink. Mark 10:27.
Right, Mark 10:27.
Mark 10:27. Humanly speaking, it is impossible, but not with God. With God, all things are possible.
The story of the rich young ruler, which is covered in 3 of the Gospels, in which someone comes to Jesus and says, "What must I do to be saved?" And the conversation
trying
happens.
to get into heaven. Who's gonna make it?
And the guy walks away. The bar is too high, and everyone looks at Jesus and say, "Well, who can be saved?" And Jesus said, "You're right. It is impossible.
Humanly, yeah.
You can't save yourself."
That's why salvation has to be by God's grace.
Yes. Because it's impossible for us to save ourselves.
Nothing in me that will merit a standing before a holy God. Nothing.
But with God, all things are possible. Now, some people would stop and say, whoa, now, how far are you going to stress it? You know what? I'm going to stretch this as far as the Word of God stretches it. Nothing.
All.
Exactly. Pos is in there. The Greek word pos is in there. Yes. Nothing is impossible. With God, all things are possible. Salvation, yes, and more than salvation. All things are possible. In other words, when you're faced with an absolute mountain that cannot be moved between the righteous call and admonition of God and His Word and your failing human circumstances, you can't get to the top of that mountain. You cannot do it in your strength, in your organization, in your fervor, in your passion, in your zeal, with your money. You can't save yourself. We can't save a nation. With man, it is impossible. But not with God. With God, all things are possible. Now, do you realize how stupid we sound saying that to thousands of people across hundreds and hundreds of radio stations and online all over the world? You're actually saying that God is more important than the political parties. God is more important than the progressive movement. God is more important than MAGA or MAHA or whatever else we're going to put up there.
Yeah.
God is more important.
Because putting anything else more important than God is idolatry.
Doesn't work.
Yeah, and idolatry is pretty bad. It's pretty destructive. Any substitute for God is idol worship.
It's futile.
But he loves us so much, he allows us to build those idols. He allows us to make those mistakes. He allows us to live our life. Think about in our own children's lives, the things that are, you see it all the time where parents try and manipulate things around and they don't teach their kids how to handle potholes. They try to smooth the road. You got to teach your kid how to navigate potholes. The Lord allows us to do that, to learn from it.
Got to feel pain.
He loves us so much. Yes.
Pain's a great motivator.
So speaking of motivation, Melanie, is this kind of spiritual reality motivational? I mean, am I just giving a pep talk here?
Well, yes, you are giving a pep talk. The short answer is yes. But what has been mulling through my mind as I'm listening to you all have this back and forth on what reality is and what God can do, there's a very conditional statement in Jeremiah 29 that if you search for me, you will find me. And it's conditional if you search for me with all of your heart. And what strikes me about that is, I'll speak personally. When I came to faith in Christ, I was 9. I mean, when I really wanted to have him as my Savior, I was 9 years old. I knew I needed him in a little girl's sense of a desire. But as time went on and I grew to know him better, then my desire to follow him grew with that. So I started with a need, followed by a desire for the relationship. On the flip side of the coin, God doesn't need us. There's no need on his end for us. On his side of the coin, it's 100% desire.
He doesn't need us. He wants us.
He desires that relationship. He wants us to seek after what his best is for us. And because he loves us so much, he'll let us stumble.
Let's go back to the beginning of our country. And this is one of the reasons why it is such a tragedy if children continue to be raised without learning the true stories of the founding, and lots of them. Let's go back to communities like Jamestown. I can remember going to the ruins of Jamestown and seeing the what existed of the original church building that they built there, right there in the center of this little tiny community, and that the first city council meetings, if you will, were held inside that building. And I remember going to Williamsburg and seeing the prominence of the Bruton Parish Church before there was a governor's mansion and all these other places. Look, I can make this really simplistic. Why did the French Revolution end up a disaster and the American Revolution work? Simple. The French left God out of the equation. They decided human reason was sufficient, but guess what? Fallen human beings left to their own devices act like fallen human beings. Without God, it is impossible. Without a higher calling, without transformation. You say, well, so America is impossible if we're going to be a complete secular people. The America of the Constitution and the Declaration, yes, it is impossible to reconcile those because the Declaration begins talking about the Creator from whom our rights come from in the first place. So if we're going to be absolute natural secularists and say there's absolutely no transcendency available for help or source to walk through this process, we're left only with our own devices. And you want to know what that looks like? Take a look at original sin. And I'll leave that just the way it is. I won't go any farther. Yeah. You can decide which original sin I'm talking about because maybe it's both.
Yeah. Can't believe it's time for a break, but it is. Just before the break, Alan, explain our presence on YouTube. How can people find us there?
Yeah, we're working to try to build a presence there because people are there. You know, it's another mission field, I feel. So people can just type in The Public Square on YouTube. TPS in Studio is the handle that they'll see. So you can type in TPS in Studio or type in The Public Square and look for The Public Square on YouTube.
Very helpful. Thank you. We'll continue for most of you. Some of you have to leave us at this time, but we are going to continue here and talk about participating with God and seeing the impossible become possible. Stay with us. Back with you to wrap up this week's discussion on the public square. Actually, we have a few minutes here to do that, and we always ask, what should we be doing in response to what we've been talking about here? So where do we start, Dave?
Well, and Wayne, lest my final remark before the break is too far nuanced, let me get a little bit more specific.
Okay.
Without God in the equation, to be above the quest for political power, particularly in the formulas of political parties, we will end up doing exactly what St. Paul said would happen to us. We would envy each other and eat each other alive. Mm-hmm. That's basically he says when you're in that kind of a situation, you're just going to end up destroying each other. The competition for power and wealth and gain is manifest from the fall, the original sin. Without the transformational power of the Holy Spirit of God, changing our minds and our hearts to believe a new order, a greater order, we can never find the self-sacrifice necessary to govern each other in love. It's just human nature. Fallen human nature is fallen. It is barbaric. And whether it's political or whether it's academic or whether it's economic, you take God out of the equation and you lose the reason for the integrity and the worth of man. And it always ends up just being about power. So this is where we are as a country right now. And you know what? It feels impossible.
Yeah.
It's bigger than us. Forget it. Just go home, homeschool, find your little congregation wherever you can be. Take care of your family and loved ones and wait for Jesus to come back.
Because stick your head in the sand.
We've got this thing so messed up, it can't possibly come back again. Well, of course it's impossible. The only question is has God given up?
Well, no, he hasn't given up, and it reminds me of the story of a radio talk show host that used to talk about he was kind of agnostic or even an atheist, but he always said he voted for people in office who were believers because he wanted them to be in there and know they were going to be held responsible for their actions by the Almighty. Wow. He said, I want them to believe that because if left to their own power, we know what men will do if they can try and do it to justify it. That's why he felt God played a role.
Look, at 45 years in mission, we ought to go ahead and just lay the whole thing out. Here's what we're proposing. If we are on our knees alone with God and come to terms with the truth claims of Jesus Christ, that's step one. Secondly, if we surrender the relationships closest to us to Him and ask God to do the impossible, which is to teach us to love someone other than ourselves, that's step number two. Number three, if whatever structure of family God permits us to come into, we act with integrity towards those that are closest with us. That's three. Four, if we can come through in whatever form of community, whether that's your church, whether that's your school, it's a combination of both, it's your city council, your county commission, if we can manifest ourselves in regards to the responsibilities of things like how our streets are cleared and how we pick up our garbage and how we care for the aged and the elderly and how we take care of each other, that's four. And then if we can manifest that through enough communities that we have a state that has people elected who believe in that philosophy, you know what happens? That's five. You have a state of people who are self-governing according to the rules of law, the golden rule, which is to love my neighbor as I love myself and do unto others as I would have them do unto me. You know what happens at that stage in the game? You're trying to figure out, what do we need the federal government for? Oh, national defense. Right? Some judicial issues in regards to arguments between states.
Maybe a post office.
And a post office would be a good idea. All right. And some highways. But in other words, the federal government becomes last in the line instead of first in the line. And we flip this thing completely upside down because we're doing the call of love instead of delegating it off to a bunch of politicians that we want to do it for us.
Yeah, and then the airwaves won't be filled on cable news with the talk of what's going on in Pennsylvania Avenue, and we'll come to the realization that that impacts our life only a fraction of what the decisions are made by our township trustee or our city council or county commissioners. That's where the action's happening.
And if we actually started practicing self-control and doing self-government and doing the things that we're supposed to do and have less dependence on the federal government, maybe we would have less of a national debt. We wouldn't have $37 trillion in debt put out there by the geniuses that we have put in charge over us.
Maybe those taxes would change too.
there's a jigsaw puzzle piece missing, and that's the educational system.
Oh, yeah.
Because we wouldn't have these universities fomenting hate and actions that destroy lives, even down to kindergarten. I mean, you can talk about the universities, but that's just an outgrowth of what comes out.
Go K through 20, go as far as you want.
Yeah, the whole system needs to be relooked at. Yeah.
We need to change our minds. And with man, that's impossible, but not with God. With God, all things are possible. Right. So 45 years into this work, we're basically saying if God doesn't help us, we have no help. If God doesn't change us, we have no hope. If God doesn't save our country, we don't have. And what does God saving our country look like? God saves people.
He saves people, but it's throughout Scripture. You see, he cares about the details. Mm-hmm. We get caught up as humans in the big things, and he cares about the details, details that make the things happen.
In the Old Testament, the concept of the value, there's passages in the book of Proverbs that drive me crazy. Like, God loves the weights and the measures and the stones in the bag. What the heck is that talking about? In the ancient world, your monetary value was based upon how much precious metal you had and how large it was. And people were famous for trying to shave the edges off those things to make it look like you were getting a full payment, but they had a little back to go ahead and smelt. See, it ends up in metals again. I know how to melt those metals, okay? They would then shave them and you'd have a little, you thought you got 5 cents, you really got 4.5 cents. And I did that 10 times today. So guess what? I had more 5 cents left over. See? Yep. And God hates that. He hates dishonest scales, but he loves an accurate balance. God cares more about justice than we do. God cares more about love than we do. God cares more about people being released and captives being set free. God hates discrimination more than we do. And we're trying to do this alone. You know what we're doing to each other? We're eating each other alive. It didn't used to be that way. Now, Wayne, we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And wouldn't it make sense that we go back and study the formula that worked 250 years ago? Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Now, you may have to work, you may have to change, but God is in the equation.
Anything specific you can share with us about our plans for that celebration of 250 years?
Yeah, I can certainly do so. If you will join us in the monthly update list so that we can mail you the next update, the plans will be revealed in just a few weeks. I'm not going to say it any sooner. One big piece is happening in the first part of June that will set the course for another big piece that happens at the end of June, which will set the course for July the 3rd this year and go forward the whole way through 2028. We are going to celebrate the equation that works, not the godless equation, the God-filled equation, and we're going to try to encourage one another, as the book of Hebrews says, towards love and good deeds. All right? Hebrews tells us that, and that's why we started the Public Square in the first place, to be an inspiration every day to remind people that if we try to do the right thing the right way, we won't be alone. And it won't be as hard as you think, because with God, nothing is impossible.
But Rob, what if I don't get the monthly update? I'll miss out on this news.
Well, you better go to aproundtable.org and sign up to get it. We'll send it to you via email. We'll send it to your house. However you want to receive it, you're going to want to get the monthly update.
All right. It's available free of charge, of course. Final word, Dave. You want to wrap this up?
The final word is the scriptures. With men, this is impossible, but not with God. With God, all things are possible. And I would say after 45 years, we've had choices that we've watched people make every single day, Wayne. It's better to go with God than to go alone.
I'm Wayne Shepherd. On behalf of our team, thank you for listening to The Public Square, and thank you for your support. This program wouldn't be here without your faithful support, so we appreciate it very much. And thanks for listening to The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.